You spend your days wrestling with life, forcing outcomes that never quite fit, exhausting yourself in battles you were never meant to fight. But here's the truth you rarely hear. Life isn't resisting you. You are resisting it. And the moment you stop, everything you've been chasing starts moving toward you. When you stop gripping life by the throat and finally loosen your hold, something remarkable begins. You start to see what was guiding you all along, waiting for your surrender. When you finally let life lead, the first and most extraordinary thing that happens is that your authentic self, the one you've spent years burying, negotiating with, and performing over, begins to rise effortlessly to the surface. It's almost paradoxical. The harder you try to be yourself, the further you drift from it. But the moment you stop managing every perception, controlling every outcome, and rehearsing every step, something quietly beautiful occurs. Your true nature, which has been waiting behind all the noise, steps forward without your intervention. You see, most people live as a curated version of themselves. They exist behind masks polished by habit, fear, or expectation. They speak in tones that please others, chase goals they never chose, and play roles that drain them. Life becomes a constant performance, and the performance becomes so practiced that they forget there was ever a real person underneath it. Yet when you release the exhausting need to direct everything, the performance begins to crumble, and in its collapse, your real voice finally becomes audible. And here's the thing, your authentic self has never been lost. It has only been overshadowed by the tension of pretending. When you let life lead, that tension dissolves. You stop asking, who should I be to fit the moment? And begin realizing, the moment already accepts me as I am. This realization is profoundly liberating. It frees you from the inner war of trying to prove your worth through effort, comparison, or overthinking. You no longer grip yourself like an invention to be improved, but recognize yourself as an unfolding presence to be revealed. Life, when allowed to guide you, has a gentle way of placing you into situations where your natural qualities, not your forced ones, become the exact qualities needed. Your timing, your curiosity, your intuition, your humor, your sensitivity, your strength, they all start pouring out without strain. You begin responding rather than performing, expressing rather than calculating, existing rather than managing. And remarkably, people feel this shift. They sense your groundedness, your ease, your sincerity. There is no longer a barrier of effort between you and the world. This is the gift of surrender. You return to being who you were, before fear taught you to act. You stop editing yourself and allow your spontaneous, unfiltered presence to exist freely. You begin to notice that life becomes simpler not because circumstances change, but because you no longer distort yourself to control them. And from that moment onward, everything you do feels more aligned, more honest, and far more alive. Life stops feeling like a wall you're pushing against and starts becoming a current that carries you. Most of the resistance you've ever felt, the heaviness, the pressure, the inner conflict, didn't come from life itself. It came from living according to expectations that were never born from within you. Society hands you a script before you even learn your own voice, and you spend years trying to perform it convincingly. But the script is inconsistent with your inner rhythm, and so you live split in two, the person you truly are and the person you think you're supposed to be. This is why life has felt like a struggle. Not because life is inherently difficult, but because you've been forcing yourself into shapes that don't match your nature. You push toward goals that never belong to you. You chase timelines that were never aligned with your timing. You compare your path with people who were never walking in your direction. And every time you try to keep up, you feel that friction, the grinding of your inner truth against the world's borrowed expectations. But when you let life lead, that friction begins to dissolve. You become aware of how much of your identity was constructed, not discovered. And once you see that, you stop trying to live according to the noise outside and begin listening to the whisper inside. That whisper is steady, quiet, and honest. It doesn't demand, it doesn't shout. It simply guides. Life starts flowing when you stop forcing yourself into the mismatched outlines drawn by society. You begin to notice that you feel lighter, not because your responsibilities vanish, but because your actions finally align with your inner direction. You stop running in circles and begin moving forward with clarity. What once felt complicated becomes simple, not because circumstances change, but because you no longer betray your own nature. And here's the remarkable thing: when you move with life instead of against it, opportunities meet you halfway. The right people appear without being chased. The right insights arrive without being wrestled from overthinking. The right moments unfold without being manipulated. Flow isn't about everything being easy, it's about everything being honest. You act from your true center, and life responds in ways that feel almost uncannily aligned. The inconsistency that once defined your inner world fades. You feel whole again. Your thoughts, actions, and desires begin to match. And in that harmony, life becomes less of a battle and more of a rhythm, one that carries you forward with a sense of ease you didn't know was possible. Life is far wiser than the plans you spent years obsessively constructing. You begin to notice how many of your plans were built from fear, from scarcity, from the belief that you must control every turn or everything will collapse. Yet the moment you stop gripping the reins so tightly, life starts revealing a depth of intelligence you couldn't see while you were busy trying to outthink it. Think of all the times you forced something to happen: a relationship, a job, a path, simply because you believed it should be right. You built blueprints for a future version of yourself that didn't fully exist yet, and then blamed yourself when reality didn't obey the blueprint. But when you step back and let life lead, you start witnessing the quiet genius of the unexpected. The detours that once frustrated you begin to show their purpose. The delays you cursed begin to make sense. The closed doors you once resented reveal themselves as protections, not punishments. Life has a broader view of your journey than your plans ever could. Your plans come from what you know. Life guides you toward what you're meant to grow into. And often, what you're becoming is far larger than what your limited perspective could imagine. When you allow life to take the lead, you discover abilities, strengths, curiosities, and layers of yourself that you didn't know existed. Not because you planned them, but because life placed you in the exact experiences needed to bring them out. Life, in its own quiet way, shapes you with precision. It reveals truths about you that your plans never accounted for. Your resilience becomes visible in moments you didn't schedule. Your creativity emerges when your old strategy fails. Your courage surfaces when the path you expected suddenly disappears. Your deepest values reveal themselves not through carefully arranged plans, but through the unexpected turns that challenge your old definitions of success, worth, and identity. The more you let life lead, the more you realize that you were never lacking direction. You were only resisting the one that was already guiding you. Life does not push you off your path. It nudges you back onto it. It expands you beyond your ideas of who you should be and gently returns you to who you actually are. And as you witness this unfolding, you begin to trust something you once doubted: that life is not random, it is responsive. It meets you with clarity the moment you stop demanding control. It reveals a wiser version of you, one you could not have planned, but one you were always meant to become. When you finally let life lead, your relationship with change transforms entirely. Instead of bracing yourself every time life shifts, instead of tightening your grip when something begins to move, you start to welcome change as a natural part of your unfolding. The fear that once rose in your chest, the fear of losing control, of losing stability, of losing the familiar, begins to fade, not because uncertainty disappears, but because you stop treating it like a threat. You begin to realize that most of your fear of change never came from change itself. It came from the stories you told yourself about what change might take away. You feared the unknown because you assumed the unknown was dangerous. You feared endings because you believed endings meant failure. You feared transitions because you thought you wouldn't adapt. Yet when you let life lead, these assumptions lose their power. You discover that change is not a disruption of your path, it is your path. And the more you release your resistance, the more you notice how change has always been carrying you forward, even when it looked like everything was falling apart. The friendships that faded, the opportunities that slipped away, the dreams that dissolved, each one felt like a loss at the time. But when you look back with the perspective that surrender brings, you start to see the quiet alignment behind it all. Life was removing what no longer matched your direction, making space for what would. Accepting change does not mean you become passive. It means you become available to new ideas, new chapters, new versions of yourself. You stop clinging to what once made sense and allow yourself to evolve beyond old expectations. You stop defending your past and start participating in your becoming. And in that openness, life can finally bring you to places your fear would never have allowed you to reach. The irony is that the moment you stop fearing change is often the moment you realize how much unnecessary suffering you once created. You see how tightly you held on to things that were already complete. You understand how many doors stayed closed because you insisted on staying exactly where you were. And you recognize how many moments of growth you delayed because you believed you needed guarantees before moving forward. But life does not grow in guarantees. It grows in motion. When you let life lead, change becomes less of a personal threat and more of a natural rhythm, a signal that you are progressing, expanding, unfolding. You learn to trust that whatever leaves makes room for what aligns, whatever shifts creates space for what's next, and whatever ends clears the ground for beginnings you were once too afraid to imagine. And as these shifts unfold within you, a deeper truth becomes impossible to ignore. Life was never against you. It was patiently waiting for you to stop resisting its guidance. You discover that resistance was the only thing standing between you and your.
You know, there's something rather amusing about this whole spiritual business. People come to me and they say, Alan, I've been meditating. I've been reading all the right books. I've had this extraordinary experience of oneness with everything. And then almost in the same breath they add, but why am I so terribly alone? Why can't I find someone to love? And I look at them and I want to laugh. Not because I'm mocking their pain, you understand, but because they don't see the cosmic joke they've walked into. They've awakened to the fact that they are the entire universe expressing itself, and now they're complaining that they can't find a date on Saturday night. It's like a wave suddenly realizing it's the ocean, and then worrying that it can't find another wave to go steady with. But let me tell you something. This loneliness, this sense of standing apart from the ordinary games of romance, it's not a bug in the system. It's a feature. And once you understand why, you'll see that what looks like a problem is actually the opening of a door to something far more interesting than anything you left behind. So let's talk about love. Real love. And why those who wake up find the old game utterly impossible to play. The first thing you must understand is that what most people call love is nothing of the sort. It's a transaction, a barter system. Two hungry ghosts making arrangements in the dark. You see, we've all been taught a very peculiar story about love. We're taught that somewhere out there is the other half of ourselves, that we are incomplete, broken, insufficient. And if we could just find that special someone, that missing piece, we would finally be whole. What a marvelous piece of fiction that is. And like all good fiction, millions believe it without question. So we go through life shopping for completion. We dress ourselves up, we learn the right words to say, we practice our smiles in the mirror. And all the while we're terrified, absolutely terrified, that no one will choose us, that we'll be left on the shelf like unwanted merchandise. So this is what passes for a romance in our world. Two people, each convinced of their own incompleteness, each desperately hoping the other will fill the void. And for a while, it works. the intoxication of it, the fever, the sleepless nights, the constant thinking about the other person. We call this falling in love. But notice the word, falling. As if love were a pit you stumble into, as if it was something that happens to you rather than something you do. And what fuels this falling? Not love, my friends. Not love at all. But need, raw, desperate need. The need to escape from the horror of being alone with ourselves. The need to prove that we matter, that we exist, that someone finds us worthy of attention. It's all very romantic on the surface. The love letters, the declarations, the dramatic gestures. But underneath, it's just two people using each other as life preservers in what they imagine to be a drowning. Now here's where it gets interesting. When you awaken, even just a little bit, you begin to see through this game. You start to notice that what you called love was mostly fear wearing a prettier costume. You see how much of your passion was really just anxiety about being alone. How much of your devotion was really just bargaining. I'll be what you want if you'll be what I want. I'll soothe your terror if you'll soothe mine. And once you see this, once you really see it, you can't unsee it. It's like watching a magic trick after someone has explained how it's done. Oh, you can still appreciate the skill involved. You can admire the performance, but you're no longer fooled by it. The rabbit was in the hat all along. This is why the awakened find it so difficult to fall in love in the conventional way. Not because they've become cold or unfeeling, quite the opposite, but because they can no longer participate in the mutual hypnosis that passes for romance. They've seen the wires holding up the stage. They know the love songs are about neediness dressed up in moonlight. They recognize the whole drama for what it is, a beautiful, tragic game that two incomplete people play to avoid facing their own emptiness. But here's the thing. When you wake up, you discover something extraordinary. You're not empty at all. That void you were so afraid of, that terrible loneliness you were trying to escape, it was never real. It was a story you told yourself. A story so convincing that you organized your entire life around avoiding it. The truth is, you are not half a person waiting to be completed. You are not a fragment of something that broke apart at birth. You are the whole thing. You are the universe experiencing itself through this particular pattern called you. You are as complete right now as you will ever be. The idea that you need someone else to make you whole is like a wave, thinking it needs another wave to become water. It's already water. It was always water. And when you really understand this, when you feel it in your bones, something shifts. The desperate hunger that drove you toward others begins to quiet down. You stop scanning every room for potential saviors. You stop measuring every interaction by whether it might lead to the completion you seek. Because you're not seeking completion anymore, you're already complete. Now this sounds wonderful in theory, and in many ways it is. There's a tremendous freedom in not needing others to validate your existence. But there's also a price. And the price is this. You can no longer play the old game. You can no longer pretend that the theatrical performances of conventional romance are real. You can't fake being swept away when you see too clearly how the sweeping is done. This is where the loneliness comes in. Not the loneliness of being physically alone. That's easy. You can sit by yourself for hours and feel perfectly content. No, this is a different kind of loneliness. It's the loneliness of seeing through a game that everyone else still plays. It's like being the only adult at a children's party. The children are having a wonderful time. They're completely absorbed in their games. But you can't join them. Not because you don't want to, but because you can't make yourself believe the games are real anymore. You meet someone. They're attractive. They're interesting. They seem to like you. And in the old days, this is where the story would begin. The story of pursuit and conquest, of longing and fulfillment, of two people finding each other in the vastness of the world. But now you see the story before it even starts. You see how it will unfold. The initial intoxication, the gradual revelation of flaws, the negotiation of needs, the slow recognition that neither of you can give the other what they're really looking for, because what they're looking for doesn't exist outside themselves. And so you hesitate, not out of fear, but out of clarity. You cannot walk into a trap when you see it so plainly. You cannot drink the poison when you know what's in the cup. And this hesitation, this inability to throw yourself into the old drama, it sets you apart. Others sense it. They feel that you're not playing by the usual rules, and it makes them uncomfortable, or it makes them curious, but either way, it creates distance. Here's what nobody tells you about awakening. It raises the standard. Before, you might have been content with someone who made you laugh, someone who found you attractive, someone who filled the evenings with conversation. But now, that's not enough. You're looking for something else. Something that has no name in the usual vocabulary of romance. You're looking for someone who has also seen through the game. Someone who knows they are already whole. Someone who isn't trying to use you as a missing piece in their puzzle. Because only then can you meet each other as you actually are, not as fantasies or saviors or solutions to loneliness, but as two expressions of the same reality. Two waves that have both realized their ocean. And here's the difficulty. Such people are rare, extraordinarily rare. Most people are still caught in the old story. They're still looking for their other half. They're still trying to build their identity through relationships. They're still playing the game with deadly seriousness. And you can't blame them for this. You played it too, until you didn't. Until you saw through it. But the fact remains, the field has narrowed considerably. Where once there were many possibilities, now there are few. Where once you might have fallen in love with someone's smile, or their wit, or their way of moving through the world, now you need something more. You need them to be awake, or at least awakening. You need them to know what you know, to see what you see. And that severely limits the options. This is why so many spiritually awake people find themselves alone. Not because they can't love, but because they can't love in the old way anymore. They've outgrown it. Like a child who has learned to read and can no longer find satisfaction in picture books. The old stories don't work anymore. They need something more substantial, something real. And sometimes, often actually, that something real doesn't appear. Years go by, you meet people, you have conversations, you feel connections, but none of them go deep enough. None of them touch the place where you actually live. And so you remain alone, not in bitterness, not in despair, but in a kind of patient waiting. Waiting for someone who speaks your language, who breathes the same air, who has traveled to the same country you have and knows its geography. There's a certain dignity in this aloneness, a kind of integrity. You're not willing to settle for less than truth. You're not willing to go back to sleep just because sleeping is more comfortable. You'd rather stand in clarity, even if it means standing alone, than kneel in illusion with company. But let's be honest, it's not always easy. There are nights when the silence feels heavy, when you wonder if you've made a terrible mistake. When you look at people in their ordinary relationships, with all their ordinary dramas and compromises, and you think maybe that would be easier. Maybe you're asking too much. Maybe this clarity you've gained has cost you something precious. And you'd be right. It has cost you something. It's cost you the ability to be satisfied with illusion. It's cost you the option of using another person to avoid yourself. It's cost you the comfort of not knowing what you know. These are real costs. And sometimes they feel like too much to pay. But here's what you must understand. You can't go back, even if you wanted to. Even if you tried to play the old game, to pretend you don't see what you see, it wouldn't work. The awakening has happened. You've tasted something real. And once you've tasted the real thing, the counterfeit loses all its flavor. So what do? You wait. You live. You continue to grow and learn and experience the richness of existence. You don't close your heart. You don't become bitter or cynical. You simply recognize that love, real love, must come from a different place now. Not from need, but from fullness. Not from fear, but from freedom. Not from the desperate grasping of two incomplete people, but from the joyful meeting of two whole beings. And maybe it comes. Maybe one day you meet someone who has walked the same path, who carries the same quality of presence, who looks at you and sees not a solution to their loneliness, but a companion in the mystery. Someone who doesn't need you to complete them, because they're already complete. Someone who can love you not because they must, but because they choose to. Because the loving itself is the point, not what they get from it. When that happens, if it happens, it's nothing like the old falling in love. There's no fever, no obsession, no desperate clinging. Instead, there's a recognition, a meeting of equals. Two people who are already at peace with themselves, choosing to share that peace with each other. Not because they need to, but because they want to. Because it's delightful. Because it's an expression of the freedom they've each discovered within themselves. This kind of love doesn't bind, it doesn't possess, it doesn't make demands. It simply is. Like water flowing, like birds flying, like the sun shining. It's love without agenda, without negotiation, without the subtle bargaining that underlies so much of what passes for love in this world. But again, such love is rare, and there's no guarantee you'll find it. You might spend your whole life waiting. You might die having never met another awake being in the intimate way you long for. And you must make peace with that possibility. You must be willing to walk alone, if that's what clarity requires. Because the alternative is worse. The alternative is to go back to sleep, to stuff yourself back into the old costume and play the old part, to use someone or let someone use you in the mutual pretense that this will solve the problem of existence. And you can't do that anymore. The costume doesn't fit. The role doesn't convince. You've seen behind the curtain, and there's no putting the veil back up. So you carry this strange gift, this burden of clarity. You're awake in a world that's mostly sleeping. You see through games that everyone else takes seriously. And yes, it's lonely sometimes. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, you wish it were easier to find someone who understands. But you wouldn't trade it. Because you've tasted freedom. And freedom, real freedom, is worth any price. The spiritually awake can't find love, not because love has abandoned them, but because they refuse to call anything less than truth by that name. They've stopped confusing need with love, hunger with passion, attraction with devotion. They've stopped playing the game where two people use each other as escapes from themselves. And in stopping, they've opened themselves to something far more real. Something that may never come, or that may come tomorrow, or that may already be here, in forms they haven't learned to recognize yet. But whatever happens, they know this: they are already whole, already complete, already free. And that knowledge, that certainty, is more valuable than all the counterfeit romances in the world. They would rather be alone in truth than coupled in illusion. They would rather wait a lifetime for something real than settle for something that merely fills the time. This is the price of awakening, and it is also its gift. You lose the ability to lose yourself in others. but you gain the ability to find yourself in everything. You lose the comfort of mutual neediness, but you gain the freedom of not needing at all. You lose the old story of romance, but you open yourself to the possibility of something so much greater. Love without conditions, love without demands, love that asks nothing and gives everything. Love that is not a feeling or an emotion, but a way of being in the world. And if you never find another person to share that with, well, you still have the love itself. Because it was never in the other person anyway. It was always in you, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be lived. Not as a transaction between two people, but as the ground of your very being. As what you are, not what you do. As the ocean, not the wave. This is why the spiritually awake can't find love in the usual way, because they've already found it in the most important way. They've found it in themselves. And nothing, no person, no relationship, no romance, however sweet, can compare to that discovery. Everything else is just play. Delightful perhaps, beautiful sometimes, but play nonetheless. And you can enjoy the play without mistaking it for the real thing, without betting your piece on its outcome, without forgetting who you are beneath all the costumes and roles. So yes, you're alone sometimes. Yes, the crowd has thinned out. Yes, it's harder to find someone who speaks your language. But you're also free in a way you never were before. Free to love without needing. Free to connect without clinging. Free to be yourself without apology or pretense. And that freedom, that vast, spacious freedom, is what you've been looking for all along. Not in another person, but in yourself, where it always was, where it always will be. Yes, waiting for you to come home. Here we are, staring at something that has troubled spiritual men and women for thousands of years. This battle with lust. And the strange thing is, the more awake you become, the more conscious of the divine, the fiercer this battle seems to grow. Why is that? Why should the person who seeks God most earnestly be the very one who wrestles most deeply with desire? Let me tell you what is happening here. And I must warn you, this is not the comfortable sermon you might expect. This is about seeing the whole picture, not just the parts we like to talk about in public. The first thing to understand is this: when you awaken spiritually, when you begin to see life as it truly is, you don't become less human. You become more human. You become more aware of everything. The divine, yes, but also the earthly. The sacred and the profane. The angelic and the animal. Think of it this way. Before awakening, you were like a person walking through life half asleep. Your senses were dulled. Your awareness was clouded. But awakening is like turning up the volume on everything. Suddenly you can hear the birds singing more clearly. You can taste your food more vividly. You can feel the sun on your skin with greater intensity. And yes, you can feel desire more powerfully too. This is the first reason. Spiritual sensitivity amplifies everything. When you open your spiritual eyes, you don't just open them to heaven. You open them to the full spectrum of human experience. The same sensitivity that lets you feel God's presence also makes you more aware of the body's yearnings. The same consciousness that perceives divine beauty also perceives earthly beauty with shocking intensity. The old religious teachers often missed this point. They thought awakening would make you less aware of the flesh, but it's exactly the opposite. A spiritually awake person feels everything more deeply: joy and sorrow, peace and restlessness, love and lust. The heightened state of awareness that comes with spiritual growth doesn't shut down your humanity. It turns up the dial on all of it. So here you are, a person seeking God, and suddenly you find yourself feeling desire more intensely than ever before. And you think something has gone wrong. You think you're falling backward. But actually you're just becoming more alive, more aware, more fully human. The question is not how to stop feeling. The question is how to be with what you feel without being controlled by it. Now let's look at the second reason. And this one is painful to admit. Those who are spiritually awake often find themselves alone, not because they're better than others, but because they see things differently. They can't engage in the usual conversations anymore. The gossip feels hollow. The endless chatter about nothing feels unbearable. The obsession with status and money and appearances seems like children playing make-believe. And so they drift away from the crowd. Or the crowd drifts away from them. Either way, they end up alone. And loneliness is a very particular kind of hunger. When you have no one to share your thoughts with. When you have no one who understands the things you're seeing. When you're carrying visions and insights that others would think mad, you feel isolated in a way that cuts deep. Lust becomes a kind of bridge back to human connection. Even if it's false connection, even if it's empty connection, at least it's something. At least for a moment you're not alone. The body pressed against another body. The eyes meeting another's eyes. For that brief time, the terrible loneliness lifts. Do you see the trap? The very path that leads you closer to truth also leads you further from the crowd. And the human animal in you cries out for contact, for touch, for the warmth of another. Lust offers a counterfeit solution. It promises connection but delivers only more isolation. Because after the moment passes, you're still alone, often more alone than before. This is why so many spiritual seekers, so many monks and mystics and holy men and women throughout history have struggled in secret with desire. They withdrew from the world to seek God. And they found God, yes, but they also found crushing loneliness. And lust came knocking at the door of that loneliness, offering companionship, even if only for an hour. The third reason is perhaps the most mysterious. When you begin to wake up spiritually, you become a threat. Not to people necessarily, though sometimes to them too. But you become a threat to the forces that keep humanity asleep. Call them what you will. Demons, if you like. The powers of darkness, or simply the momentum of unconsciousness that governs most human life. Whatever you call these forces, they do not want you awake. They do not want you seeing clearly. They do not want you spreading consciousness to others. And so they attack. They probe for weaknesses. They look for ways to pull you back into the dream, back into the trance, back into the endless cycle of grasping and wanting and never being satisfied. Lust is a magnificent weapon for this purpose. Why? Because it works. It really does pull people back into unconsciousness. When you're caught in the grip of lust, when desire is burning through you, you cannot think clearly, you cannot meditate, you cannot pray, you cannot rest in that quiet inner space where God speaks. You are pulled entirely into the body, into sensation, into the fever of wanting something right now. And so the attacks come, stronger and stronger as you grow in awareness. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're doing something right. You're waking up. And the forces of sleep do not give up their prisoners without a fight. This is what the scriptures mean when they speak of spiritual warfare. It's not a metaphor. It's not poetry. It's the actual experience of anyone who tries to live consciously in an unconscious world. The battle is real. The enemy is real. And lust is one of his favorite weapons because it works so terribly well. The fourth reason is about wounds. Old wounds. Deep wounds. Wounds we carry from childhood. From rejection. From betrayal. From all the ways life has hurt us before we even knew what was happening. Most people walk through life never looking at these wounds. They're too painful. Too frightening. But when you begin to wake up spiritually, you start seeing them. You start feeling them. All the old pain rises to the surface. The abandonment, the shame, the fear of not being loved, the conviction that you're not enough. And here's what happens. Lust offers to soothe these wounds. It offers a temporary balm. When you're in the grip of desire, when you're pursuing or being pursued, you forget the pain for a while. You feel wanted. You feel alive. You feel like maybe, just maybe, you are enough after all. But it's a lie. Lust doesn't heal wounds. It just covers them up for a moment. Like putting a bandage on a festering sore without cleaning it first. The infection remains, and often grows worse, because now you've added shame to the wound. Now you've added the knowledge that you're using people, or being used, or both. Now you've added another layer of pain on top of the original pain. The spiritually awake person sees all of this. They see the wound. They see the lust rising to cover it. They see the shame that follows. They see the whole cycle, and seeing it doesn't make it stop. Sometimes seeing it makes it worse, because now you're aware of what you're doing even while you're doing it. You're conscious of the trap, even as you step into it. Healing these old wounds requires something else entirely. It requires facing them, sitting with them, letting them be felt without running away into distraction or comfort or false connection. This is hard work, the hardest work there is. And many people, even spiritually awakened people, would rather battle lust than do this deeper work of healing. Because at least lust offers moments of pleasure, however brief. The work of healing offers only pain, at least at first. The fifth reason is the most paradoxical of all. The very gifts that make you spiritually powerful also make you vulnerable. When you have heightened sensitivity, when you can feel the divine presence, when you can sense the interconnection of all things, you're operating at a very high frequency. Your consciousness is expanded. Your awareness is vast. But you're still in a body. You're still flesh and blood. You're still subject to all the drives and hungers and needs of the animal self. And here's the strange thing. The higher your consciousness rises, the stronger the pull downward becomes. It's as if the universe seeks balance, as if the very expansion of your spiritual nature creates an equal and opposite pull toward the purely physical. This is why so many spiritual teachers, so many gifted healers and prophets and visionaries have fallen into scandals of the flesh. Not because they were hypocrites, not because their spiritual gifts were fake, but because the combination of high spiritual power and unguarded physical nature creates a dangerous situation. Like a tall building without a foundation. The higher it rises, the more catastrophic the fall. The answer to this is discipline. But not the grim teeth-gritting kind of discipline that feels like punishment. Rather the discipline of tending to the whole self, spirit and body, mind and flesh. You cannot just soar in the spiritual realms and ignore the needs of the body. You cannot just pray and meditate and expect the physical nature to take care of itself. The body needs to be honored, fed properly, exercised, given rest, given healthy touch and connection, given creative expression. When these needs are met in healthy ways, lust has less power. When they're ignored or denied, lust becomes overwhelming because it's trying to fill too many holes at once. So what do we do with all of this? How do we live with this strange combination of heightened spiritual awareness and powerful physical desire? First, we stop pretending the battle doesn't exist. We stop acting as if spiritual people are supposed to float above all this earthly messiness. The flesh is real. Desire is real. And fighting a real enemy requires acknowledging it's there. Second, we stop fighting alone. The isolation I spoke of earlier is part of the trap. Lust thrives in secrecy. It grows in darkness, when we can find even one other person to be honest with. Someone who won't judge us but will stand with us. The power of lust begins to break. Not because confession is magic, but because isolation is what feeds the beast. Third, we attend to the wounds. This means sitting with the pain instead of running from it. This means feeling the loneliness instead of medicating it with false connection. This means looking at the old rejections and abandonments and letting them be seen and acknowledged. It's painful work, but it's the only work that actually heals. Fourth, we practice presence with our desire without acting on it. This is perhaps the hardest practice of all. When lust rises, the instinct is to either indulge it or suppress it. Both of these are forms of violence. Indulging it leads to shame and emptiness. Suppressing it leads to explosion later. The middle way is to simply be present with the feeling. To feel the heat of desire without having to do anything about it. To notice how it rises and falls like a wave. To observe it the way you might watch a storm from a safe place. This takes tremendous courage. But it's in this space of presence without action that real transformation happens. Not because you're fighting the desire, but because you're neither fighting it nor feeding it. You're just watching it. And in the watching, something shifts. Finally, we remember that we are not this battle. We are not the desire or the shame or the struggle. We are the awareness within which all of this arises. Like the sky that watches the weather pass through. The storms come and go. The clouds gather and disperse. But the sky remains unchanged. When you can rest in this awareness, even for a moment, the battle loses its power to define you. Yes, lust may still arise. Yes, the struggle may continue, but you're no longer identified with it. You're no longer convinced that this struggle is who you are. The spiritually awake struggle with lust not because they're failing, but because they're awake enough to feel the full force of being human. They're sensitive enough to feel every current, every drive, every hunger. And they're isolated enough to face these things often without support or understanding. But this struggle, as painful as it is, can become a teacher. It can show us where we're wounded and need healing. It can reveal our need for real human connection, not false substitutes. It can humble us, reminding us that we're not as far above the flesh as we might like to think. And it can deepen our compassion for every other human being struggling with their own desires and weaknesses. The battle with lust is not a sign that you're spiritually failing. It's often a sign that you're spiritually growing. Growing into a fuller awareness of what it means to be both spirit and flesh, both divine and animal, both awakened and still very much in the process of learning what that awakening means. So be gentle with yourself. Be honest about the struggle. Seek help when you need it. Attend to your wounds. Practice presence with your desires without being controlled by them. And remember, always remember, that you are not alone in this battle. Every mystic, every saint, every truly awakened person has walked this same difficult path. The flesh is weak, yes, but the spirit...
Some people say awakening kills your motivation. That once you wake up and see through the game, you won't want to play anymore. And perhaps you felt that yourself. You start asking, if life is just an illusion, why bother? Why chase goals? Why work hard? Why get out of bed at all? It's a strange feeling, isn't it? To look at the world and suddenly see the shine come off. Like the prizes you once chased don't quite sparkle the way they used to. And yet, that's where many men find themselves. You've built, you've worked, you've carried the weight. But when the game no longer fools you, the question creeps in, now what? Is this awakening? Or is it the end of your drive? But that's rather like a child who discovers that hide and seek isn't serious business and then declares, well then, I shan't play anymore. You see, the whole charm of a game is that it isn't serious. If it were, it would be work. And the beauty of life is very much the same. When you awaken, you don't stop living. You simply stop clutching at life. You realize it's a dance, a play, a marvelous hide and seek between what you think you are and what you truly are. But the ego doesn't like that kind of play. The ego wants medals, trophies, something to wave about and say, look at me. And when it fails, it collapses into self-pity. Oh no, I've lost my drive. What's really happened is quite the opposite. You've been set free from the dreary business of proving yourself, and in that freedom, the ordinary shines, walking barefoot across the floor, watching a leaf tumble through the air, each one a small miracle, if only you pause long enough to notice. Because, let's be honest, what most of us call motivation is usually nothing of the sort. It isn't energy. It's anxiety in a clever disguise. A little whisper inside that says, go on now. Achieve something, prove something, carve your initials into the universe before you vanish. So off you go, collecting medals, chasing money, buying a slightly faster car than your neighbor. Not because the doing is delightful, but because the thought of being nothing frightens you out of your skin. Curious, isn't it? You spend half your life exhausted, not for the thing itself, but to shine up this image of me. And then awakening happens. The curtain parts, the lights come up, and suddenly the actor notices the crown on his head is only paper. The whole performance, a comedy dressed as tragedy. Imagine a bird outside your window. It doesn't sing to impress you or to pass an audition. It doesn't say, listen, I've composed a new tune, I do hope you approve. It sings because singing is what a bird does. And when you awaken, life begins to move through you in just that way. Not to prove, not to compete, but simply to express itself. Like a tree putting out blossoms, or a river tumbling over stone. And here is the delicious secret. Awakening is not the end of passion, it is the end of pretense. You find yourself falling in love not with trophies or achievements, but with existence itself. The laughter of your child, the sound of rain on the roof, even the ache in your bones. All of it is music you had rushed past before. And a strange realization dawns. The very troubles you once cursed are part of the rhythm. Pain and joy, loss and gain. They shape one another as valleys shape the mountains. Without shadow, light is flat. Without ache, love is shallow. This is why you are here. Not to escape the dream, but to taste it. For what kind of game would it be if you could win at once? Without risk? Without surprise? The whole delight of being human is that it isn't easy. So awakening doesn't lift you out of the world. It drops you right into the thick of it. Heart open, laughing at the cosmic joke, grateful for every note in the symphony. And you see, the point was never to arrive anywhere. The point is that it's happening at all. So instead of being whipped along by fear or dragged about by ambition, a new kind of energy begins to move you. Not the restless push of must do, must win, but the effortless pull of delight. It's the difference between rowing a boat upstream until your arms ache and suddenly noticing the current is carrying you all along. Now don't mistake this for laziness. Play is not lazy. Children at play have more energy than any businessman chasing a deadline. A musician absorbed in his instrument. A craftsman shaping wood with care. A gardener lost in the rhythm of planting. All of them are moved by this other kind of fire. Not the fire of fear, but of joy. Life begins to act through you. As naturally as a tree putting out blossoms in spring. And you find you are no longer the manager, the pusher, the taskmaster. You are the expression. The river doesn't need motivation to flow. The sun doesn't get up in the morning saying, I'd better shine or else. And when you're awake, you discover you are not separate from that river, not apart from that sun. You are the same unfolding energy. And so your doing becomes like dancing. The steps are there, the rhythm is there, but it isn't forced. It's play. It's music. It's effortless. That is the energy of awakening. Not driven by the whip of should, but moved by the joy of being. And here's the marvelous joke of it all. When you stop grasping at meaning, life hands it to you everywhere. The ego thinks, if I can't be the hero, the conqueror, then what's left? But awakening flips the whole thing on its head. You begin to see that life was never asking you to conquer it, it was inviting you to join it. You discover a kind of freedom that was hiding in plain sight. The freedom to laugh at yourself, to stumble without shame, to play the game knowing full well it's a game. And from there, everything ordinary becomes radiant. Washing the dishes, walking the dog, talking nonsense with your friends, none of it is wasted, because none of it needs to be anything other than what it is. The meaning you were chasing all those years wasn't somewhere else. It was in the very act of living, unpolished, unpretentious, and already complete. Awakening doesn't take away your passion. It takes away the counterfeit fuel, fear, comparison, that restless itch to measure yourself against everyone else. When you stop treating life as a ledger to balance, life becomes lavish. You begin to notice beauty was never hiding from you. You were simply too busy chasing something else to see it. You see, the beauty of awakening isn't in having life all figured out. It's in discovering that life, just as it is, has always been unspeakably beautiful. Awakening is beautiful because it hands you back your own life. Before, you were living under a spell, pulled along by comparisons, fears, and the endless race to be enough. Awakening cracks that spell, and suddenly you can breathe. You discover that you were never missing anything, that nothing out there had the power to complete you, because what you were seeking was already in you all along. That recognition is not just relief, it's freedom. It's beautiful because it restores wonder. A child doesn't need a reason to chase fireflies. They do it because life itself is astonishing. Awakening returns you to that innocence, but with the depth of everything you've lived through. It's not naive joy, it's seasoned joy. The kind that knows pain and yet chooses to marvel anyway. It's beautiful because it softens you. Instead of clinging to control, you begin to trust. You see that even your struggles were part of the story that shaped you. And when you understand that, bitterness gives way to gratitude. What once felt like punishment reveals itself as preparation. What once looked like chaos begins to show its pattern. And above all, awakening reconnects you with the sacredness of existence itself. To be awake is to realize that life was never a problem to solve, but a mystery to behold. Every breath, every touch, every fleeting moment is a gift you don't own but are allowed to experience. Awakening doesn't make you abandon life, it makes you fall in love with it. Not because it's perfect, but because it's here, and you are here to witness it. That recognition is the gift. And the great joke is this: you don't need a reason to love it. You don't need to win at it. Being awake is simply falling in love with life over and over again, for no reason at all. Like watching a bird cross the sky, and suddenly feeling a gratitude so deep you can't explain it. Gratitude that the bird exists, and that you exist to see it. So, awakening doesn't take you out of the world, it drops you right into the middle of it. Laughing, weeping, playing, knowing the whole time that the point was never to arrive anywhere. The point is that it's happening at all. So remember this, you are not here to prove you're alive. You are here to be alive. And once you see that, even the ordinary becomes extraordinary. To live awake is to let life hold you, instead of you holding life. It's to bow, not in resignation, but in reverence. Reverence for the sheer impossibility that you are here, that this world exists, that you get to taste it at all. And when you live that way, gratitude ceases to be something you practice. It becomes the air you breathe. You feel grateful for the good and and also grateful for the mistakes, for every wrong turn that opened a new road. Grateful even for the ones who hurt you, because without them you might never have learned to bend, to soften, to grow. You feel grateful for the arguments that taught you patience, for the failures that stripped away your pride, for the disappointments that pushed you deeper into yourself. And in the end, you feel grateful for everything, for the sky and the sea, for bread on the table and laughter in the street, grateful for traffic jams, for rain-soaked shoes, for the sheer fact that anything at all is possible, because awakening shows you this marvelous truth. Nothing is wasted. Not the joy, not the sorrow, not even the foolishness. It all belongs, and it is all part of the miracle that you are here to live it.
From the moment we wake in the morning until the moment we drift into sleep, there is a constant stream of words, images, judgments, and memories passing through the mind. It is like an endless conversation that never stops, a commentary on everything you do, everything you see, everything you remember, and everything you fear. And because it never stops, you begin to assume it must be you. After all, who else could it be? These are your thoughts, your worries, your plans, your stories. And so you equate yourself with this voice, believing that your entire identity is made up of what passes through the mind. But here is the problem. If you are your thoughts, why do you so often feel trapped by them? Why do your thoughts so often torment you, contradict you, sabotage you? Why do they seem to arrive uninvited, staying long after you wish they would go? Have you noticed how thoughts behave like guests who refuse to leave? You invite one in, perhaps a simple memory or a plan for tomorrow, and suddenly it has brought all its friends. Before you know it, you are hosting an entire party you never agreed to. Worries about money, arguments you've had, fantasies of revenge, daydreams of success. They chatter endlessly, refusing to leave the room. And because you mistake yourself for this party of thoughts, you begin to feel helpless. You think, this is who I am, a confused, anxious, restless mind. But is that true? Let us play a little game of attention. Close your eyes and listen to your thoughts. Watch them appear. Some are memories, some are images, some are just stray words. Now ask yourself, if you are your thoughts, then who is watching them? Notice there is an awareness that sees the thought come and go. That awareness is not the thought itself. It is like the sky in which the clouds drift. And this realization is deeply unsettling to the ego, because it means you are not what you always thought you were. You are not the voice in your head. You are the silence in which the voice appears. But for most of us, this confusion persists for our entire lives. We live identified with our thoughts. We cling to every idea, every belief, every worry, as though it were who we are. So when your mind says, you are worthless, you believe it. When it says, you will never succeed, you collapse into despair. When it says, you must be perfect, you live under impossible pressure. And yet, if you really were your thoughts, you would control them. You would simply choose better ones. But you cannot. The thoughts come and go, uninvited, like the wind. This is the problem of mistaking thoughts for self. You end up living like a puppet, jerked around by whatever idea happens to pass through the mind. Think of how exhausting it is to live this way. You lie awake at night, your mind racing. You replay conversations from the day. You imagine disasters that never happen. You judge yourself mercilessly for mistakes that only you remember. The result is suffering, anxiety, restlessness, a constant dissatisfaction. And because you believe these thoughts are you cannot escape. You think, this is just who I am. But what if it isn't? Imagine a radio left on in the background, playing all day. Sometimes it plays beautiful music. Sometimes it plays commercials you despise. Sometimes it interrupts with static or bad news. And yet, you would never mistake yourself for the radio. You simply hear it. But with thoughts, you forget this. You fuse with them. You identify with them. And so, instead of listening, you become entangled. This is why people suffer from overthinking. Because if you believe you are your thoughts, then every anxious idea becomes a threat to your very being. Every self-criticism cuts like a knife. Every worry about tomorrow becomes an existential crisis. And the tragedy is that none of it is true. They are just thoughts, flickers in the mind. But because you take them as yourself, they become chains. Consider the paradox. If you are your thoughts, then who is the one hearing them? Who is the one aware of the endless chatter? Clearly, you are not the thought itself, but the witness behind it. Yet, because this simple truth is so often overlooked, people spend their entire lives trapped in an illusion. They fight their own minds, trying desperately to control, suppress, or silence thoughts, not realizing that the struggle itself arises from the false belief that these thoughts are who they are. The problem, then, is not the thoughts themselves. Thoughts are natural, just as waves are natural on the ocean. The problem is that you cling to them, identify with them, mistake them for yourself, and so you suffer, tossed about by the storm, forgetting that you are not the waves, but the ocean. To see this clearly is the beginning of freedom. But before we can discover what that freedom looks like, we must first face honestly the trap we are in, because until you see the problem, you cannot let go of it. So ask yourself again, are you the voice in your head, or are you the silence that hears it? If the problem is mistaking yourself for your thoughts, then the resolution is seeing clearly that you are not them. And when you see this, something extraordinary happens. You discover a freedom that has always been there, hidden in plain sight. Let us return to the image of the sky and the clouds. Thoughts are like clouds, drifting, changing, forming shapes, breaking apart. Some are dark and heavy, some are light and beautiful. But the sky is never harmed by the clouds. It holds them, but it is not them. In the same way, you are not the thoughts that pass through your mind. You are the vast awareness in which they arise. And when you realize this, a profound shift occurs. You stop clinging to every passing thought as though it were life or death. You stop believing that the chatter in your head defines who you are. You begin to watch thoughts the way you might watch the wind rustle through the trees, present, but not binding. Notice this in practice. A thought arises, I am not good enough. Before, you would take it seriously, feel wounded by it, identify with it. Now, you simply notice, there is the thought that I am not good enough. And just like that, it begins to lose its power. The thought has not disappeared, but your identification with it has. And that makes all the difference. This is what the Buddhists call non-attachment. Not the suppression of thoughts, not the denial of them, but the refusal to confuse them with who you are. When you see a thought simply as a thought, you are free. It may still pass through, but it no longer commands you. And so, life becomes lighter. The anxious voice is still there, but it is only a voice. The self-critical story still arises, but it is only a story. You no longer fight with your own mind, because you no longer mistake it for yourself. Think of the relief this brings. The relief of no longer believing every worry, no longer collapsing under every judgment, no longer being tormented by every story your mind tells. Instead, you can smile at it, as you might smile at a child's imagination, vivid, dramatic, sometimes frightening, but ultimately harmless. Alan Watts often pointed out that you cannot get rid of your thoughts any more than you can smooth out the surface of the sea. The more you try, the more turbulent it becomes. So the secret is not to fight them, but to let them be, to let them come and go like waves, without needing to control them. For you are not the waves, you are the sea itself. And here is where life becomes miraculous. Because when you stop clinging to thoughts, you begin to experience moments of stillness. You notice the silence between thoughts. You realize that the mind is not a constant stream, but a series of flickers with gaps of awareness in between. And in those gaps, you discover something deeper than thought, presence itself. Presence is not something you think about. It is not a concept. It is the felt reality of being here and now. It is the taste of food, the warmth of the sun, the sound of laughter. It is life directly experienced before the mind comments on it. When you are no longer entangled in thoughts, you can finally experience life as it island. This is why your thoughts are not you. Because the you that is truly alive is not the commentary, but the awareness that hears it. And when you rest in that awareness, life opens up. Think of how this changes even the simplest things. Eating becomes an act of presence, not a distracted rush. Walking becomes a dance, not just a way of getting somewhere. Conversations become listening and sharing, not just waiting for your turn to speak. Life becomes richer because you are no longer lost in the endless chatter of the mind. Now, this does not mean thoughts disappear. They still come, they still go, but you no longer cling to them. You no longer build your identity out of them. And so you live in a freedom that is untouched by the storm. It is like learning to surf. At first, you are tossed around by every wave. You are frightened, overwhelmed, exhausted. But once you learn to balance, the waves are no longer a threat. They become the very medium of your joy. Thoughts are like that. When you are identified with them, they drown you. When you see them as passing waves, they become the rhythm of your play. And perhaps the most beautiful realization is this: the awareness behind thought is already free, already whole, already untouched. You do not need to create it, you only need to notice it. When a thought comes, you notice. When it goes, you notice. And in that noticing, you discover the vastness that was always there. So the invitation is simple. Stop trying to control your thoughts. Stop trying to be rid of them. Instead, see them for what they are: fleeting appearances, like echoes, like ripples on the surface of being. And in doing so, you discover what you truly are. Not the echo, but the silence. Not the ripple, but the depth. Not the thought, but the awareness in which all thoughts arise and dissolve. This is the liberation. This is why your thoughts are not you, because you are something far greater, the space in which the whole dance of thought, feeling, and life unfolds. And when you realize this, you are free.
Marriage, as we know it, is often a beautiful illusion crafted from fear, a socially sanctioned promise to make love stay. And yet, love, like water, slips through clenched fists. We swear before priests and judges that we will feel the same way forever, that we will keep our hearts fixed like the stars. But the universe doesn't work like that, neither does the heart. We say, I love you, but then we must notarize it, stamp it, file it in legal documents. What was once wild and spontaneous becomes measured, certified, and sealed under watchful eyes. We have turned marriage into a contract, not a dance, a bond of ownership, rather than a celebration of freedom. Most people, when they say, I do, unconsciously mean, you're mine now. That is often where the trouble begins. For while some rare and beautiful unions do thrive in shared commitment, many falter when love becomes entangled with possession. You cannot bind another soul and expect it to remain free, and love above all needs space to breathe if it is to sing. Falling in love is divine madness. It is irrational, uncontrollable, and glorious. You don't rise into love, you fall. There is something fundamentally risky about it, something sacred. Because to love is to surrender, to give up control. To fall is to say, here I am, do what you will with me. Sensible people don't fall in love. They calculate, they measure, they protect. But the moment you fall in love, you are no longer in control. That is why it is mad. And in that madness, there is a higher sanity. Now here's where the real trouble begins. We try to capture the mystery of love and lock it in a legal cage. We go before judges and priests and, in the name of God, the state, and sometimes even the police, we swear to feel a certain way forever. Can you imagine? We take something as wild and unpredictable as falling in love and we try to make it permanent, binding, respectable. It's as if love isn't real unless it's signed, sealed, and witnessed by vicars and attorneys. And so this lightning bolt from the sky, this mad surrender of the soul, is converted into a contractual obligation, a legal performance. You're no longer dancing, you're following choreography. And so the sacred becomes rehearsed. Spontaneity gives way to strategy. You keep little lists of things to remember, the right words, the right gestures, the right timing. You are now managing love. You are working at it. And the more you work at it, the less it is there. Love, which was once a leap of faith, has now become a performance under contract. And in that effort to keep it, to secure it, we strangle it. It retreats quietly, respectfully behind the curtains of duty and obligation. Marriages don't always fail with drama. Most collapse quietly under the weight of our attempt to control what was never meant to be controlled. The real tragedy is not that love disappears, it's that we pretend it hasn't. We convince ourselves that if we just act loving enough, if we go through the motions, the feeling will catch up. But that is not how the heart works. We send flowers, we write notes, we plan dinners, but not from desire, from duty. We become performers on a stage we did not realize we had stepped onto. And the audience is not our beloved, but our own fear. Fear of failure. Fear of change. Fear of being alone. You cannot force love to behave. The more you grip it, the more it slips away. It is like holding a flame in your hand. The tighter your fist, the faster it dies. We don't talk about this much because we're afraid, because we were told that true love means permanence, that if it changes, it was never real. You see, most of us were raised to believe that real love means forever. But who said that? Where did we get this idea that if it doesn't last until death, it wasn't true? What whispered that myth into our ears so convincingly that we never stopped to question it? This is the root of so much suffering. Because the moment we believe love must be permanent to be valid, we begin to fight change. And yet, look at the universe, nothing stays the same. Galaxies spin, stars collapse, even mountains erode. The only thing that doesn't change is plastic. And we dare to think love should? When we let go of the belief that love equals forever, something incredible happens. We stop clutching. We stop demanding. Love stops being a jail and starts becoming what it always was meant to be, a freedom, a presence, a moment of shared wonder that asks for nothing but honesty. You know you're in love, not because you've made a promise, but because you feel joy in their presence. You feel the urge to protect what you love, to nurture it. You feel pain when it suffers, peace when it's near. And most of all, love reveals itself in the giving, in the watching, in the simple act of being with. But then fear creeps in, the fear of losing. And so we try to bind it, control it, freeze it in place. We confuse our need for certainty with love itself. And in doing so, we kill the very thing we meant to protect. But this simply isn't true. Love changes. It breathes. It pulses. It has its own seasons. And pretending that it doesn't is what slowly kills it. Honesty, not effort, is the lifeblood of connection. Better to say, this is how I feel now, than to pretend you still feel how you once did. To love someone truly is not to promise eternal passion. It is to promise presence. And presence only exists in truth. People work very hard to keep a marriage together. And as they do so, they may fail to recognize that they are being untrue to their own emotions. They say, I must control my feelings for the sake of the children, for the sake of society. And so they work and work. And one of the ways of working is to convince yourself that you are still in love. You go through the motions. You hypnotize yourself with loving language. You remember to buy the flowers. You keep a diary for anniversaries because forgetting would be unacceptable. You do the things you're supposed to do, and you think, this is what love must be. The performance goes on, but the presence has left the stage. And what once was alive, spontaneous and mad and beautiful has become respectable and dead. That, you see, is the tragedy. Not that love disappears, but that we pretend it hasn't. Not that we change, but that we lie about it. And in doing so, we trade the real for the role. And that, my friends, is how most marriages quietly wither not from conflict, but from pretense. You see, love is not something you can work on like a job. It is a flame. And if you try to pin it down, it dies. You cannot force a feeling to remain by obligation. And yet, this is precisely what so many marriages are built, upon a quiet, desperate pretending. And I speak not from theory, but from bitter experience. You build yourself into a wall-to-wall emotional trap, and in the background, something in you knows it's not real. You feel it, like a ghost. The true feeling, the spontaneous magic's gone, but the performance must go on. This is why the mystery dies. Not because love is gone, but because truth is. The honesty that once connected two people has been replaced by performance. And so the marriage continues respectable on the outside, but quietly crumbling within. You see, to love someone truly is not to chain them to a past feeling. It is to stand present with them every day and to say honestly, this is where I am now, and to let them do the same. That is the only kind of love worth having, the kind that breathes, the kind that changes, the kind that is free. Now let's look clearly at what people mean when they say, my husband or my wife. You see, behind that little possessive pronoun is a very old and very dangerous illusion that love means ownership. It doesn't. You do not own another human being. You do not own their soul, their body, or their attention. And the moment you try to, the whole thing begins to rot. We think that by securing someone legally, ceremonially, and socially, we somehow keep the love in place. But love, by its very nature, is free. It arises when you're not looking. It dances only when the music is real. The more you try to pin it down, the more it slips away. To say I love you should never mean now you belong to me. It should mean I choose to dance with you now, and I'll choose again tomorrow if the music still moves us. But instead we shackle it. We say, you may not change. You must continue to be who I need you to be. And when the other inevitably begins to shift us, all things must we feel betrayed. Not because they were dishonest, but because we expected permanence in a world that only offers movement. The truth is, you don't need someone to be yours. You need them to be themselves. And if they choose to share that with you, then you are blessed. But if you demand it, expect it, or require it, you have already lost it. Love is not a cage. It's not a certificate. It's not a role in a play. It is simply the freedom to see another as they are and to let them be. We must begin to imagine a different kind of relationship. One not based on obligation but on presence. Not on permanence but on participation. You see, love isn't something you can force to last forever by swearing to it. The moment you make it a duty, you've robbed it of its essence. Real love, like real music, happens in the moment. It is not a means to an end, it is the point itself. Now, suppose two people say to each other, let us agree not to trap one another. Let us be honest, rather than loyal to a performance. That, you see, could be the beginning of something true. Instead of saying, I will always love you, say, I will be true to how I feel. And I will respect how you feel, even when it changes, because it will change. Everything does. A marriage, if it is to be anything sacred, must be a daily meeting of two people who allow each other to be. Not a prison of promises, but a shared space of mutual freedom. And the irony, of course, is that only in freedom can love truly thrive. Only when you stop trying to hold someone do they come willingly. Only when you let go does anything real begin. Let marriage, then, be not a trap of fixed roles, but a place where two individuals meet in truth, again and again, where change is not feared, but welcomed, where love is not performed, but allowed. And when it fades, as all forms do, we do not blame it for ending. We simply acknowledge that it lived, and that is enough. You see, many of us grew up with this picture of what love and marriage should look like: forever smiles, unchanging vows, and happily ever after. But real life isn't like that. People change. Feelings shift. Circumstances evolve. And that doesn't mean something went wrong. It just means life is alive. If you've ever sat next to someone you once loved and felt the silence between you grow heavier over time, you'll understand. If you've ever tried to force the connection to stay the same when it's already moved on, you'll understand. And if you've ever looked in the mirror and felt that you're not the same person who said, I do, years ago, then you already know the truth. Love isn't supposed to be perfect, it's supposed to be real. And real love, like all living things, needs room to breathe, to stumble, to transform. It doesn't always last in the way we imagined, but that doesn't mean it failed. Sometimes love ends. And sometimes it begins again in a new way with someone else, or even within yourself. So if you're in love, be present, be honest, don't chain it down with fear, and if you're letting go, do it with grace. Thank the love that brought you here, and know this: you are not broken. You are growing. Let love be what it truly is. A gift freely given, not a contract